out there? Welcome to another live stream here from AutoCrit. I am Daniel, one of our story coaches, editors, presenters. I do a little bit of everything around here. And we are going to be diving into some famous authors today. I'm going to announce who they are in just a moment. Although, if you're on our mailing list, you've already been a little bit spoiled, but because we want to give you a little sneak preview. But if you're not familiar with AutoCrit, AutoCrit is the premier website for writers. We have our writer's desk, which is our software which allows you to write and edit and run reports and compare yourself against famous authors. And we'll look into that a little bit today because we're going to be comparing our famous authors and looking at how they stylistically make their word choices, which I'm sure is part of their major success. But we also have a community on AutoCrit and our Academy page, which includes educational material, similar to some of the things that we're going to be talking about today. Now, this month is NaNoWriMo, and NaNoWriMo, it's about reaching 50,000 words during the month of November. So I was asking the people in the chat, how are you doing in your Nano? Let's see. Behind, but I will catch up. Great attitude, behind a lot, but you did manage to fix the plot. Great. That's very, very helpful. Cassie's on par. Good. You got to keep up 2 more weeks, yes? I'll notice a difference, right? Some of them are like, I'm behind, but I'm going to do it. And she's like, I'm ahead, but I don't know. It's always that balance, right? I'm way behind on Nano. Every day I recalculate my daily word count to make it. Don't ask. It's like one of those things that by the end, it's like, you have to write 40,000 words today. It's like, yeah, probably not going to happen. But again, as long as you're working on your writing goals, as long as you're hitting the keyboard every day or as often as you can, you will certainly make progress. I'm behind. Oh, you have a bruise that makes it hard to sit. Well, that's bad. Well, that's okay, though. You get to give yourself a little bit of a bye, right? You can give yourself some wiggle room. Yes, still making progress. Where's my helmet? I'm going to need to find it for the next. We have a couple more of these, right? Yeah, I'll find it before the end. It's like a big mystery. My son has stashed it somewhere. And I keep forgetting to look for it until I'm about to come on. Now, I love this. Elaine says that she's doing a happy dance because the final book in the Consequential Love series was published today. Fantastic. Love to hear about publication stories and author wins. So great for you. Fantastic. Ultimately, that's 1666 words a day. Remember, the ultimate goal of NaNoWriMo is that it's an opportunity to develop writing habits. So while these numbers and these goals are great, what's even more important are it's the friends you learn along the way. It's the skills that you learn along the way, right? It is, and maybe the friends too. Community is great too, but it is figuring out, maybe what's hindering you from being as successful of an author, perhaps from a just logistical standpoint, right? Is it just hard to find time to write? Is it hard to find a place for write? Are people annoying you? Do you need to schedule your time differently? When you really have to focus on it in a month and you're trying to crank it out and productivity is the goal more than anything else, it can expose a lot of things that you're not usually thinking about. Because often we're thinking of the writing process and that beautiful artistic process, and we're not thinking, I just need to crank, because a lot of us are not in that professional mindset, or we're not under contract, so we don't have to. And putting, essentially this is pretending like we are in a sense, and maybe working faster than we even would if we were professional, but it can certainly expose a lot of those shortcomings and things we need to adjust. She's worried it'll be you meeting 40,000 words after Thanksgiving. Well, and if you pull that off, let me know that story. That's like a David and Goliath level hero journey, right? One thing you can do along the way, we've talked about this several times, but it bears repeating, is don't be a perfectionist, right? It's about being productive right now. This is not this is not about making an artistic masterpiece within a month. It's about putting stuff on the page. And I say stuff, right? It could be just stuff on the page, and you will work with it later. The way that a book is often designed is much like a sculpture, where you have a block of something, like a block of marble, and then you carve out. They say, how do you carve an elephant? You get a block of marble, you carve everything that doesn't look like an elephant. And fair enough. It's the same thing with a story, right? How do you have a compelling story? You have a block of text and you carve out everything that doesn't make a compelling story. But unless you have that block of text, you don't really have anything to work from. So this is about creating that block of text a lot of the time that you're going to carve out. So don't panic if it just looks like a slab and it doesn't actually have much shape to it. That can come later. Turn off your editor for now. Flow as much as you can. It's much easier to build momentum if you're just kind of in the thick of it, if you're letting it go, if you're saying yes to yourself a lot of the time. It's like improv. If you've ever been in an improv group, they say just say yes to yes. Don't say no, because that kind of throws off the whole sketch, right? It's just, you've got to go with what the other person is doing, and you just add and you add and you add and you add and you add, and that helps the momentum. But on the other hand, don't just trash it with nonsense. Don't just game it for yourself. All right. Let's look at these comments here. Oh, you're going to check it out later. All right. I was stuck at the end of Act 1. I went to my last chapter and did a backward outline and found a 10-chapter gap between Act 1 and Act 3. That's a lot. But it does make sense because, Act 2 tends to be bigger. So what probably, I'm just speculating, what probably happened was you just rushed, to get to the end. You had your setup, the big obstacle the protagonist was up against, and you're like, okay, let's get there. And you got the protagonist all the way to the obstacle. And then it was like, well, wait a minute. They don't really have the skills to get past the obstacle yet. I forgot that part until you went back. Maybe. I could be wrong. Hit my head and realized I was missing my villain operating in plain sight. Yeah, probably the antagonist was probably should have been resisting more. It was too easy to get to the end point. And because you're giving the character that friction, they're probably going to grow a lot. So that Act 3 victory is a lot more earned. Let me know if I'm right on that. My time is consumed with my edits of Book 2. Book 1 is Inquiries of the Agents. I got 5 rejections and encouragement. That's great, actually, to get some encouraging comments. Often you don't even get comments at all. Even a flat-out rejection can be better than what you sometimes get, which is nothing. I'm celebrating. I'm in the game, out to 25 agents so far. It doesn't sound like you're doing bad at all. Lots of no's before you get a yes is the common story. You will hear exceptions, but that is the common story. You have to expect that rejection is part of the game. Just how it works. All work and no play makes Jack's adult boyfriend 5,000 times does not count. I mean, probably not. And if you start doing that, people might suspect that something's up in their house and they might be rather concerned. All right. So we're going to talk about author inspiration from a couple of authors. Today, I wanted to deal with some suspense authors, some authors that they often call them the airplane novels. They write the sort of story that you pick up in the airport and then you will read it over the course of an airplane ride. So I have James Patterson and Lee Child. So the question is these two authors both exist in a pretty narrow category in a sense. They have quite a clear audience, very similar in a lot of their styles. So the question is how similar are they? You might just assume they're going to be pretty much exactly the same. And how similar are they to just what's out there in general? Is there a difference when you're trying to write this sort of story that basically, grabs the audience and yanks them through really quick? And this is a story. Often these are meant to be absorbed in maybe one sitting, like I said, a long airplane ride or something like that. And you're just supposed to be just sucked in and engrossed and done. And so is that something that makes them quite different than, for example, Tolkien? You might expect so, right? How would you expect so? Think about it. You've been watching this channel for a while, so you're a smart audience. Think about how it might be different. I'd love to see some speculation in the comments, and we'll see how close we are. I'm considering adding paragraphs that have a character say blah blah 1,000 times to make it for missing words. Exactly. That's what I'm saying. Somebody is commenting, are you sure Patterson wrote the work? He's famous using other writers. Fair, you can make that argument that perhaps what we're going to be comparing is from a kind of a brand versus a person. I'm not going to even tell you what the name of the book is. So if you're James Patterson's lawyers or whatever, I'm not saying you didn't write this book. People have made those claims. I think some of it is public knowledge, but at any rate, it is a brand and there is a consistent style throughout. And you would imagine that if that's, if there's other writers involved, they're putting it into a style. So it still counts for the sake of this argument. Remember, ultimately, as I've been saying in these inspirational videos, everybody gets inspiration from somewhere, right? When we are looking at other artists for inspiration, sometimes it can make us feel a little icky, a little bit awkward, because it's like, well, can't we just be original? But we're going to be influenced by all kinds of things, by all kinds of people. And I have said this before, I'll say this again. I think intentional influence is where it's at. When you literally look for something and you're asking yourself to be intentionally influenced, what that's going to prevent you from doing is just copping out, in my opinion, especially depending on what it is you're intentionally being influenced by. That's not the same thing as just lifting shallow concepts. Last week, somebody was commenting on that. There was a work that, lifted a lot of the basic elements of the plot, but they completely missed, what made the plot actually work, what made the story actually work. This is an intentional look to find out why it worked so that you can borrow from it. It could be that you do not write suspense, that you do not write thrillers, that you do not write mysteries or action, right? However, that doesn't mean there isn't anything to learn from people that are highly successful, and particularly successful at writing something that, like I said, yanks the audience through. Because even if that's not the style that you want for your entire book, that might be the style you want for like a chapter or a scene or something like that, right? So if we can figure out some of the methods that they use, we can look at it ourselves in a stylistic way. All right. One thing we always want to do, again, this goes back to intentionality, is asking ourselves, why we're reacting the way we're reacting. And the great thing about the writer's desk within AutoCrit is that it can tell you a lot of the why, because we have some hard data to tell us what is going on, right? So we can see, and we can figure out from the data, they're using the reason why this stands out is because of these word choice decisions, these paragraph breaks, the thematic, the power words, things like that. We can see it for ourselves in data, which is sometimes a lot easier than us trying to parse out a whole 60,000 word book and figure it out for ourselves. All right, so James Patterson versus Lee Child, as it were. Let's take a look and under the hood here. Let's look at some numbers and let's figure out what makes this tick. Hold on. I want to make an adjustment here so I don't go Inception on everybody. If I don't make my stream its own window, then what happens is all of a sudden you'll see like this never-ending pattern of windows. All right, so the first thing I wanted to do was I wanted to compare Lee Child to just generic fiction. So let's take a look at that and let's see what that looks like. Let me just move this up. Okay, so I'm going to make myself a little bit smaller too. Okay, so you can see in general, quite similar to normal, really. And you would kind of expect this. One of the reasons why is because both Lee Child and James Patterson are trying to reach a broad audience. So readability is paramount. They want their works to be easily absorbed. They're supposed to be absorbed at a quick rate, right? You're supposed to be able to just kind of suck them through. So what you would expect is something that is more or less, even keel. It's not going to make a lot of strange choices. Now, one place where you can see where it is the pacing and momentum. And that's not a surprise because you would expect that the pacing and the momentum of the Lee Child book would be different than a normal book. It certainly feels like that, right? It feels a lot faster. Now, how is this done? Well, we can look down and we can see. Now, an interesting thing that you might have expected is it's in the paragraph breaks, but it's actually not. Lee Child does not, in fact, have faster paced paragraphs than the average general fiction, at least according to our data. It's certainly quite compelling that it is not. But on the other hand, it still feels quick. So what's going on? Well, look at how many words there are per paragraph, and the number drops significantly. So it's not a matter of how many sentences there are, it's a matter of how many words there are per sentence. You can see here the difference between 11 and 8. It may not seem a lot in raw numbers, but in terms of percentage, that's huge, right? That is a dramatic shift, and you can see that graphically represented. And that makes a big difference because what that creates is this sort of staccato feel, right? And it's like, da-da, 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 and you just keep doing it, right? So that white space isn't maybe what you would expect. But that's not really but that's not where it's at with Lee Child. Now we're going to see whether or not that's the case for James Patterson in just a moment, but you definitely can see that difference, right? This is going to be the biggest difference you will find in most suspense and thriller versus general fiction, is that their sentences are a lot quicker. Now, like I said, you might not write suspense or thriller, but you probably do have scenes that are suspenseful or thrilling, right? Or you want to ratchet up the tension. Keep this in mind. Short sentences tend to do that. He looked over there. There was a cat. The cat jumped. The cat looked over to his, when you have stuff like that, it creates this feeling of a quick pace. It actually can change your heart rate when you're reading it back. And it's a lot different than having those longer sentences, right? Even if you look at, if you look at these, the word count, it's like so many of the sentences are short. Look at that. Of this example, 4,259 sentences had less than 10 words or up to 10 words. Very few words, very few are over 40. Very few. But you'll notice it's not like that's never done, right? We don't want to end up monotone either. We do want a distribution. You'll notice this distribution is not the common one, right? Usually you would see less severe of a slope between the first two, particularly. It would be, it would kind of gradually go less and less. But what you don't want is for everything, to be super fast, because then you never have a moment to catch your breath. You never have a moment to point out something is more important. It's a psychological trick that the more you talk about something, the more important it seems. This is, and that's because, that's kind of true, right? Like when you hear somebody say something over and over and over again, it means they're thinking about it. So you can actually use this. It's like the people that will tell those positive mantras to tell for yourself, right? And that's because you can kind of short circuit your brain if you keep saying, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this. It starts to put in your head that it's possible. So it's the same thing with an audience. Like if you have a longer sentence describing a waterfall, what that's telling the audience is that waterfall is tremendously important, or at least they're going to wonder if it is. And the bigger the contrast, the more it is. So I would imagine in this work, you will notice if you go to some of those longer sentences, you will see that there's probably very important information being given in those scenes, a very important emotional linchpin moments, etc., right? And Lee Child really wants to draw your attention to it in contrast to the typical staccato rhythm. Now, I do not know whether or not either of these artists are consciously aware of this data, right? This is something that they do. But what we can do is we can look after the fact and we can figure out what it is that they're doing, right? But it's very possible that they are, because I would think at a certain point you're going to study your own work and you're going to realize that. Yeah, that's what I tend to do. Now, what about dialogue? Dialogue actually pretty much standard. Yeah, pretty much standard. Just looking back at some of these other things. Well, I like this. Reading outside your genre is like eating foods you don't know. Even if you don't like Italian, it's good for your palate to be familiar with the flavors. You can use the elements. Yes, exactly, right? Especially because most of the time what we're doing in when we're writing is essentially like fusion cooking, right? We're not doing this is the 100% this all the time, because that would be tonally really bland. It would be monotone, right? We have different scenes. Like I said, no matter what genre you're writing in, there's probably going to be moments where you are going to dip into this sort of style. Who doesn't like Italian? That's a very good point. But we're not going to jump on that analogy. I love this. I may be behind, but my first 8 chapters scored a 93 on autocrit. Hey, Lee, call me. It could be that your pacing is just more typical, right? Because that's the biggest thing that's making Lee Child different, is that their pacing is quite a bit quicker. So my guess is your pacing is not as fast as theirs. So there you go. And this is why you can, you got to be careful with how you use the score. The purpose of the score is to show you how it is you are comparing yourself to the typical. And sometimes you deliberately want to have a low score based on typical, because you're not trying to be typical. You're trying to stand out. The question is where are you trying to stand out, and are you doing it on purpose, right? So that it's always very helpful. Okay. So when it comes to dialogue tag, Lee Child uses a lot less other tags than is normal. Very few. It's almost all said and asked. And again, this goes back to readability. When you train your readers into just always seeing said and asked, what that means is they can just breeze through your work. It just falls away. It's kind of like, it's just background. It's like writing 2 + 2 = and somebody just fills in 4. They're not having to think about it, which is very helpful, because there's other things that you might want them to think about. And that sort of stage direction, as it were, is not really earning you anything. Now, I'm not harping on people that have a different style than this. Clearly, this is an outlier from the norm. However, just keep in mind, it is a tactic that you can use, and it can be quite effective, especially, again, if readability is a very big goal of yours. Adverbs and dialogue. Look at this. Almost never. There's almost never a modifier. And again, that's going to slow down the pace. Even just a little bit. He said softly. Well, that softly, that's just extra thing, right? Like, it's just extra place. And the other thing that it slows you down is if you write a sentence and it's like, they're coming, he said softly. Well, you maybe didn't read they're coming in a soft voice. You read it in a normal voice, right? And now you're having to go back in your head and rewrite that sentence, or rethink that, reimagine that scene and be like, oh, he said that softly. And so it can create a loop. And if you're trying to pull people through, you don't want anything like that. Now, you can put adverbs at the beginning. You could say, he said softly, they're coming, right? But often they're not like that. Often adverbs in dialogue tags happen after the fact. They affect the way that you imagined what came before, and it does slow down your momentum. So it's not a surprise to me that this is something that's rare. That makes me wonder, though, what about adverbs in general? And actually, speaking of adverbs, Lee Child is very much in the normal. Look at that. Yeah, just, showing versus telling normal. Filler words, less than normal. Again, you would expect that, right? In a work that's trying to pull you through and be really punchy, you expect that some of that conversational language might get pulled back, and it'll get more in your face and stripped down because it's not trying to be casual. It's also a tone thing. Sometimes filler words, because they have that conversational language and they can feel casual, can make you feel kind of a sense of comfort, like it's somebody reading you a nice bedtime story. And that's not the goal of these books. These books are a little bit harsh and tough, and and it's action, and no, it's like bam bam bam. So you don't really want to give people that sort of feel. You want to give it the feel that's just coming at you always, and it's maybe a little blunt, right? And so again, it's not a surprise the filler words are less. But again, think about this when you're writing a scene: suspenseful, thrilling, filled with tension. Look at your filler words. This is a good place to curve back. Look at your adverbs and your dialogue tags. This is a good place to potentially curve back. Passive is less than normal, which would be expected because passive can tend to make things less in the now, less direct. That's the whole point. Cliches are a bit more. That's also what you would expect for readability. Instead of reaching for an unusual idiom or metaphor, they use more and or more typically used language. But again, that can help with the readability. That can, instead of somebody maybe stumbling over, not quite getting an analogy, they're just going to understand it right off the bat. And ultimately, I wouldn't say these sort of books are designed with that sort of, the artistic flair is more of the compelling story, the characters, the action sequences. The stylistic word choice is generally not what the audience is looking for. And I don't mean to sound disparaging. It's just different, right? It's a different sort of style. It's certainly just as authentic of an art. It's just a different sort. Redundancy is pretty much normal. For power words, it's not a big surprise to see what we're seeing. A fear and encouragement is normal for any sort of action driven story, adventure type story. You need enough fear words that the audience is afraid, but you can't have no encouragement, or it's like they'll just fall into pieces. So it's a nice balance. The greed is quite high though in this particular story. So I'm guessing in this particular story, there's a lot of money going on, which is motivating people, or some sort of power that people are really trying to get at, which makes a lot of sense. Just trying to see there's not a lot of safety, which makes a lot of sense. You would not expect to feel very safe in a story like this. Initial pronouns a little bit lower than normal. Sentence starters are normal. Generic descriptions are also a little bit higher, but again, that can speak to readability. When you use more specific language, you can be using more higher vocabulary words. You can be using words that are specific and maybe takes the audience slightly longer to get at in their mental Rolodex. And that could be, again, an intentional choice to simplify it for the sake of ripping the audience through the story. Repetition is also a little bit higher, and that also would make sense. You would expect the amount of unique words in something that is intended to be easily digested to be lower. So, all right. Let's look at the next example, which is comparing Lee Child to James Patterson. Well, let's put them up against each other, and we're going to see the difference. Let me check the comments here really quick. I'm going back here. How do I slow down the pace, or do too many slow down the pace? I think I lost the thread where that's from. Hold on. If you do too many adverb tags, maybe that's when that was said. You slow down the pace. Too long of sentences. A lot of these things, essentially, if you want to slow down the pace, you can do the opposite of what these authors are doing, and maybe that's intentional. How do anti-adverb authors slow things down without adverbs? I'm assuming you're saying, what if you already don't have adverbs, and so you're trying to figure out how to make the difference, between your text? Well, again, you can look at the filler words, you can look at the sentence length, and those are two big places. The how many words are in a sentence, and how many filler words you have in a sentence. You could look at that as well. Sentence conjunction junction. That's their function. Schoolhouse Rock grammar songs. Yes, we live in the memories. That's great. All right. So anyway, James Patterson versus Lee Child, as it were. I say versus. It's just comparing them, right? So I am now James Patterson. I know. It's amazing. So I'm comparing it against Lee Child, and you can see very similar. The biggest difference is in the dialogue. So generally speaking, quite similar to each other. So one of them uses a lot more dialogue than the other. Do you have any speculation for those of you who've read both? Comment. Let's see if you get it right. So pacing, there is a big difference between Lee Child and James Patterson, and that is that James Patterson does not like slow paragraphs at all. You look at that. No. So a lot less sentences in Lee Child's paragraphs. If you pick up a book, try it out. Test this out. Pick up a Lee Child book, pick up a James Patterson book, and look at the white space. You're probably going to see more in a James Patterson book. However, that their pacing scores are similar because their average words per paragraph ends up being similar. And the word count in a paragraph is pretty similar as well. Average words per sentence, also quite similar. Although you'll notice that even though James Patterson's sentence average is similar, his distribution is quite different, right? Lee Child, it was like a whole lot of 0, 10, and then, a few examples of all the others. James Patterson's a nice little slope. Very few 40 plus sentences. And so James Patterson almost never has a long sentence, whereas Lee Child does from time to time. Interesting. Different approach. But it does end up with a similar on average result, right? So it just goes to show there are multiple ways to get there, right? So maybe it's a matter of just on average, your sentences are a little bit shorter, or you're like Lee Child and just about all your sentences are very short with the occasional really long sentence. And you could maybe, take a moment and read both of them, and see which style you prefer, because those are both different ways of creating that fast-paced approach. So I think that's very interesting. Dialogue, though, Lee Child has a lot more dialogue than James Patterson does, at least in this work. So James Patterson has a lot less dialogue. James Patterson also seems to have a lot less dialogue than fiction in general, which is interesting. But I think it would make sense, considering I think in terms of the subject matter, James Patterson would be considered more straightforward action, and Lee Child would have a lot more, conversational friction sort of scenes. Let me know what you think about that postulation there. Now, in terms of said and asked, you'll notice that unlike Lee Child, James Patterson does use different dialogue tags. He's not as concerned about that. He will use others. He'll also use a lot more adverbs. Look at that. More adverbs in general. A lot more adverbs in general. So that's a difference. I would be curious to see if just thinking about it from a broad standpoint, I would say the reason why this would be the case is similar to my speculation about the dialogue, right? If there's a lot more action going on and there's a lot of, you have to describe this is happening, this is happening, and this is happening. Adverbs are often used for things like time, for things like the extent of something. And so it could be that it's not a lot of ly words, but it's a lot of those words. So filler words, a lot more filler words as well. So it's just not as tight of a writer. It's a different sort of style. So again, what I would suggest is take a moment if you're writing these sort of suspense action sequences, compare the two and see which one you just tend to like better, and then that might be a better author to compare to if you want to adopt those sort of styles yourself. Passive is very similar. Cliches a little bit more, similar redundancy. When it comes to the power words, James Patterson splits the difference between greed and lust as the third option. Again, you have encouragement and fear very high. That's to be expected because people have to have that tension, but then they have to have a reason to want to go forward and that positive motivation. For greed and lust, lust doesn't always have to mean like sexual lust. It can just mean, a lust for power, a deep-rooted primal drive for something. So it may not be that this is anything in the romantic sense of the word. Initial pronouns are similar. Sentence starters are similar. Generic descriptions are similar. Pretty similar. Repetition, although a little bit less. But I think this hopefully showed you, again, there are multiple ways of approaching, I don't want to say the problem, the method of writing fast-paced or, scenes that are going to, like I said, tear the audience through. There are multiple ways of going about it. And you can see those two different approaches, even though in the main there's a lot of similarities between them as well. It's interesting to see how, when all is said and done, they reach a similar conclusion, even though they're using different methods to get there. And that's one reason why it's so helpful to not just look at the overall, but kind of dive down into it. Feeling better about your cliche counts. I mean, the thing about cliche is that, cliches, automatically you assume that you're doing something wrong, but the goal is not to have zero cliches, because again, cliche can be a shorthand. It's just much easier for the audience to accept than something that would be more creative. It's not always worth it. You don't always have to have that original way of saying it. How old is Daniel? He got it. I am not in my mid-50s. Nope. I am not. I actually know other people my age that know Schoolhouse Rock. It made the rounds, It made the rounds. Huge fan of it. I love I mean, one of the things is as you can probably tell, I'm very passionate about education and presentation and making education interesting. And I've always basically been like that. But even if I hadn't, I'm sure I would have discovered Schoolhouse Rock, because I know about a lot more obscure ways to learn grammar than Schoolhouse Rock. If you ever need any advice, just ask me, because I know about a lot of random ways to learn about a lot of different things, because I love mnemonic devices and I love educational music. It's like a weird hobby of mine. Okay. We talked about writing styles. One thing I wanted to talk about are villains. Yes, this Thursday at 1 p.m. Eastern and Sunday at 7 p.m. Eastern, Autocrate is hosting the Villains and Antagonists Obstacles Workshop, which will be hosted by yours truly. And we will be going through how to make a compelling villain or antagonist, or both, because your villain can in fact be your antagonist. And if you're confused and you're like, well, how can a villain not be an antagonist? And what's the difference? And what are all these terms? Don't worry, we're going to explain all of that. It's very important, and it's very helpful to understand mechanically what we're talking about. Just one reason why I call it the Obstacles Workshop, because I don't want you to just think that I'm going to tell you how to make the best Darth Vader type character ever. Not that, super evil, snidely whiplash mustache twirling villains are bad. They're quite fun. But there are multiple ways to have obstacles, and it's important to understand how to make them work. Obstacles are how your main character grows throughout the story. Without an obstacle, your main character would be stagnant, and then they would reach the end, get the victory for really no particularly great reason, and it would not be very fulfilling. We've all seen stories like that where it seems like the big obstacle really didn't do much besides be a subtle nuisance. And, we might have enjoyed the work anyway. It doesn't necessarily kill your project, but a really good obstacle can make or break the, can really make or break it being a huge success, I think. Villains is this for the story or the villains that prevent us from writing? Yes, it is not going to be about the obstacles that annoy us in life. Although, because we're going to be speaking about what would affect your main character, for all I know, it may have some greater implications for you. But the simple thing that I'm going to bring up, this is a little teaser. I know. Look at me teasing, giving you some information. We're going to discuss is how obstacles have to be obstructive, imposing, and demanding. Those are the three keys, really. And we'll go in more greater detail than that. But if you fully understand what that means by being obstructive, by being imposing, and by being demanding, well, you will be on track for a much better obstacle character, and your story will be so much better. So anyway, yes, we just finished the hero workshop, but we are going to be doing that obstacles workshop. It is now available. You can go online. You can go to autocrit.com. You can sign up right there on the main page. I'll put a link in the description as well. I would love to see it. And the great thing is at the end of the workshop, you can submit your character profile, because we're going to have a profile for you to fill out that's going to tell us all about your character. And at the end of that, you will submit it and you'll get feedback from our AutoCrit team, and we'll tell you opportunities you can have with your character, maybe things you didn't think about as options. Maybe there's something about it that doesn't quite make sense, or it doesn't seem consistent. We're going to give you that sort of feedback so you can really shore up that character and be poised for success. Is there going to be a workshop to transfer a villain to a hero? We will discuss that in this workshop, because the question is because we talked about anti-heroes in the hero workshop, characters that are unlikable, and how do you make that work in terms of how to make the obstacle actually turn out to not be the obstacle, which sometimes happens. We will discuss that. Don't be surprised if something in my story sounds like an evil jackhammer. I won't stop. All right. Oh, because the villain preventing me from writing is my upstairs neighbor replacing the floors. Nice. Well, this is the time to write down all the ways that noise can affect you, how annoying noise can be, and all that sort of thing. What do loud clanging noises sound like to you? Just write all that description, put it in your parking lot, and then whenever you need it, you have it available to you because you're in the moment. All right. So anyway, for those of you who are AutoCrit Pro members, we do have a free event for our Pro members this Friday in the AutoCrit community. And that will be at 1 p.m. on Friday. And what we're going to do is I wanted to do looking at first sentences. People enjoy that. So you can come on with your first sentence, throw it in the chat, and I can give you a sense of what I think about it as a first sentence. And we'll be discussing as well our progress in Nano, share our wins, get together as a community. It's going to be a lot of fun, but it'll be certainly a cool way to get some quick feedback on something you're working on right now. Somebody was asking if they can ask something off topic. Feel free. Go ahead. This is an open forum as long as it's on topic about writing. I'm not really going to be able to explain gravitational forces. I'm not a physicist. All right, so we have a question regarding something going on Amazon. And I will look into that. I don't want to just give a quick answer to that. But look for the answer within the AutoCrit community, Tammy, okay? Because that's a good question. So, all right. Anyway, we will see you around the AutoCrit community. If you have not, please like and subscribe to this channel, because we have more upcoming live streams. We do this every Tuesday at 1 o'clock. We're going to go through another couple of authors next week. We'll take a look under the hood and see what makes their writing what it is. Do I have a good beet cake recipe? That's a running joke that will never die. But in the meantime, I will see you around the AutoCrit community. Bye, everybody. Thank you so much.